Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Odin's movie blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope doing well, and today we'll be talking about a very interesting scenario with the Rise of Skywalker box office. I know y'all have been inundated with this stuff, but let's just be honest here. This is still pretty exciting to talk about because, as Travis Bean over at Forbes.com talks about, this is one of the wildest box office, one of the most mixed message box office runs of a film in a very, very long time, to the point where even Scotty Boy Mendelsohn, I mentioned this earlier on Twitter, is talking how Star Wars Rise of Skywalker will not top Rogue One at the domestic marketplace. Now, I have mentioned that previous to his article. I actually beat Scott Mendelsohn to the punch on that one, so boom, take that, son. But it is interesting that the box office media, that the mainstream media, that the sometimes shill media is now starting to talk about how, yeah, this film is making money, but is it really all that impressive when you look to and compare it to other films in history? And I'm going to talk a lot today and reading the article by Travis Bean because I think that he makes a lot of really great points that a lot of people probably aren't taking into consideration, as both River and Willow fight behind me in their complete excitement for me being home. But it's been a wild year for Disney. That is an understatement of the century. 6 different movies from the studio made over $1 billion at the global box office, and 7 of them made over $300 million domestically. One of those movies, Endgame, would go on to become the highest grossing movie of all time, before inflation, of course, while another, Frozen 2, would quickly become the highest grossing animated film ever, probably also until you adjust for inflation, but I haven't looked into the Frozen 2 numbers yet either. I know. I didn't like Frozen 2 either. Yes, just about everything has been great for the studio, which accounted for about 40% of the earnings at the US box office in 2019. And this is where I want to stop first, because this is the biggest problem with the current box office. Almost half of all of the earnings for just the US box office came from movies by Disney's production company. Keeping in mind now that they now own Fox properties and that they are now getting the Fox revenues as well, and thinking about all the future projects that are going to have the Disney logo, or at the very least have the connection to Disney with it, it seems very likely that that number, that percentage, is going to grow. I know, it's insane, River, and I don't like it. And the reason why is because it really honestly shuts out not just other companies, but other movies from being able to be as successful. Now, I know what you're trying to say. Hey, it's competition. That's how it all works. But when Disney starts buying up all these production companies and starts cornering the market in this way, in addition to what it does with theater chains, forcing them to have so many showtimes, forcing them to have these crazy contracts where in some countries, including South Korea, there's currently a lawsuit against Disney for violating certain terms, it kind of makes you realize that if anyone is to be responsible for the reason why the box office has actually been slumped, because even though Disney has had almost a record-breaking, if not a record-breaking year at the box office, the entire box office is down. That's right. Even with the massive success of a film like Endgame, the overall box office is still down. And the reason why is because Disney has created this atmosphere where people will only go to see movies for these big budget, big box office, big, Marvel superhero-esque types films, and will stay home for the smaller movies. Now, of course, I'm not going after people that go to see movies that way. Trust me. We only have so much money. Movie tickets are expensive now. Box office, popcorn, drinks, all that stuff is so expensive. However, I think that to ignore the fact that I think Disney has a major role to play in the reason why many other studios are being shut out of the market and are being not given as much of a piece of a pie is something that I think is actually kind of worth looking into for violations of things like antitrust. But again, that's a whole other topic for another day, and I honestly think that the more we find out about their practices behind the scenes, the more that'll come apparent. I'm actually very interested to see what happens with that South Korea lawsuit. But when it comes to Star Wars, as it says here, when it comes to the Star Wars of Rise of Skywalker, it's been weird, right? So this has not been a normal film. Make no mistake, he says, the latest Star Wars sequel is a massive hit. So far, Rise of Skywalker has indeed pulled in about $465 million domestically, which ranks 17th on the all-time list before adjusting for inflation, of course. And by the end of the upcoming weekend, it'll probably become the 46th movie to ever eclipse the $1 billion mark globally. Now, there is a chance the movie will cross $1 billion in this weekend. There's also a chance it might fall short. That is also going to be an interesting trend to follow. But that wild success has also been plagued by a few box office hiccups. When we account for ticket price inflation, Rise of Skywalker falls from the number 17 spot, all in the all-time, all-domestic list, all the way down to the hundreds region, which is well behind the 7 other Star Wars movies. That's right, not just Disney Star Wars, all Star Wars movies. Opening weekend, I think, except for Rogue One, of course. Except for Solo: A Star Wars Story, of course. Opening weekend for Rise of Skywalker was miles behind The Force Awakens and Last Jedi. Plus, the second weekend was so bad, it saw Rise of Skywalker become the 11th member of the $100 million Losers Club. Very exclusive club and not a good one to be a part of. To cap it all off, the third weekend saw a massive revenue drop that only 2 other club members have ever outdone. Talking about the $100 million Losers Club. So basically, this film has had massive drop-offs based on how much it made opening weekend. If this movie had made crap tons of money opening weekend, had made what they projected over $200 million plus dollars, then we wouldn't have this discussion. The film would have already crossed $1 billion. It already would have been at the process of eclipsing films like Last Jedi, but it didn't. It had a subpar opening weekend in comparison to the other films, and it's had pretty decent drop-offs since then, and has come to the point now where there's a question, a giant question mark that now even people like Scott Mendelsohn are starting to raise, which is, hey, Rise of Skywalker, at the very least domestically, possibly even internationally, won't even top Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, which made just over $1 billion, making Rise of Skywalker the lowest grossing of the Star Wars trilogy. Now, that is not something that can simply be ignored. As of now, Rise of Skywalker closes out its first month in theaters. It faces yet another test. If the latest Disney film matches Box Office Mojo's prediction of $17.3 million, and I've seen some other sites report it going to be closer to $16 million, which would bring Rise of Skywalker's total to around $482 million domestically, then that'll mean an insane 90% drop from opening weekend. That means since opening weekend, the revenue would have dropped 90%. Which is indeed an insane number. That might not seem that crazy, considering Rise of Skywalker's opening weekend saw $177.4 million. Just about any drop should seem massive, right? But when we put that into perspective with the Star Wars franchise, and this is why we always need to compare it, this is what Jeremy, Geeks and Gamers, this is what all of us in the Phantom Menace have been saying. Yeah, this film might be doing well if this was just any other movie. But this is not just any other movie. This is not just any other franchise. This is the Star Wars franchise. But when we put that into perspective, continuing on with the Star Wars franchise, Disney's other 2019 blockbusters, and the other members of the $100 million Losers Club, well, the results aren't pretty. To start, let's compare Rise of Skywalker's potential $17.3 million weekend with the 4th weekends of recent Star Wars films. We're going to skip past the 3 original films of A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, and just concentrate on the 8 most recent additions. For each film, we'll compare their opening weekend with their 4th weekend. The percentage drop will represent the change from each of those weekends. Turns out, a $17.3 million weekend would represent the biggest drop of any Star Wars movie. Look at that. 90% drop. In good company with 89.2% drop for, guess what? The Last Jedi, the film that really started the backlash, that started it all. Solo: A Star Wars Story, which didn't have a chance in hell. And then right after that, you've got Rogue One, 86.3. Revenge of the Sith, 86.3. Rogue One, 85. Attack of the Clones, Force Awakens, Phantom Menace. Interestingly enough, these did not have drops. So that would make it the worst drop from week 1 to week 4. The worst drop in all Star Wars movies. Now, of course, they're keeping out the originals, but something tells me the originals probably would not have this type of drop either. Things worked differently back then, which is why they kept them out of the discussion here. But man, oh man, that is a terrible metric to look at. While Rise of Skywalker's 90% drop wouldn't be much worse than The Last Jedi's $23.7 million 4th weekend in theaters, it would be significantly worse than The Force Awakens' $42.4 million showing. Plus, some of those numbers are deceiving. While Rogue One's 85.7% drop doesn't seem much better, that Star Wars film made $22.1 million on its 4th weekend, $5 million more than the Rise of Skywalker's expected weekend showing. That's right. Rogue One, especially, that's before inflation, doing better domestically. That's pretty telling considering Rise of Skywalker pulled in $177.4 million opening in comparison to Rogue One's $155. Now let's compare Rise of Skywalker with Disney's other 6 domestic juggernauts from 2019. Endgame had a 91.5% drop. Well, remember, Endgame made a crap ton in its first 2 weeks. So that's understandable. This film did not make a crap ton, which is why the 90% drop is pretty telling. Lion King, Frozen 2, Captain Marvel, Toy Story 4, Aladdin. That list is pretty telling, where Rise of Skywalker's percentage is in line with Avengers Endgame and Lion King. Both of those movies made, and here's the point, made over $250 million in its opening weekend. Their colossal drops were to be expected, as opposed to Rise of Skywalker, whose opening weekend numbers were more in line with Disney's other 2019 films. Finally, let's compare The Rise of Skywalker with the 10 other film members of the $100 Million Losers Club. In order to join this club, a movie must make $100 million less on its second weekend than it does on its opening weekend. Turns out, the expected 90% drop for Rise of Skywalker on its fourth weekend isn't too far off from several members of that club. Avengers Endgame, 91.5, Captain America, Civil War, 91.4, coming in at number 3, Rise of Skywalker, Lion King, Last Jedi, Iron Man 3, and all these movies. Here's the thing. While the drop is much more massive than the likes of Jurassic World, Incredibles 2, and Avengers, Rise of Skywalker is fairly in line with two other huge 2019 Avengers Endgame and Lion King, and of course, the last Star Wars sequel, The Last Jedi. So while 90% drop wouldn't be unprecedented, it would rank significantly behind every Star Wars movie ever since 1999. But most importantly, it would also mark the fourth straight underwhelming weekend for The Rise of Skywalker. Boom. Fourth straight underwhelming weekend, coming in under expectations, River. I know. 90% plunge is what it seems to be. And as it said, Box Office Mojo projects it to be 17 million. Box Office Pro, which is another site that I follow, has it around 16 million. So that could be an incredible drop. And when we're starting to talk about this being one of the worst drop-offs from opening weekend in Star Wars history, literally the worst drop-off from week 1 to week 4, and a film that is now in all likelihood going to either make as much, if not less, especially when you adjust for inflation, than Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, the IP of Disney is in trouble. Because we can argue until we're blue in the face. This film is a success. You read all these articles, they'll tell you, hey, by general standards, it's a success. But by Star Wars standards, this is where the story is. It is the worst performing week-to-week Star Wars movie when we look at these percentages. It is an underwhelming movie. And remember, this was supposed to be the end game. This movie should have made the $200 to $250 million that other films made this year from Disney. But it didn't. It came in well below expectations. It came well below the standard. The drops have been consistently bad. And now we're at the point now where Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, which many people in the comments have been defending, saying, hey, that's a great movie and I love that movie. And hey, kudos to you for liking it. But if you're going to tell me that the box office for that movie should be anywhere near Star Wars Episode 9 of the Skywalker saga, Disney, congratulations. You've destroyed an IP. And if you are honestly throwing around these rumors that, oh, don't worry, we're going to go High Republic era in the next set of films, and we can't wait to see what fans think about it, go ahead and look to see what you've done with the IP. Take about 10 years off. And then you know what? Even better, either hire George Lucas to be your creative director with people like Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, fire the hell out of Kathleen Kennedy, Rian Johnson, and maybe you'll get enough fans back. But until that happens, stop making movies. Seriously, stop making movies, because if you don't, guess what? These drops will continue. People will continue to say, screw you to your trash, screw you to your garbage, and we will continue to be here making content about it because we're pissed. We love Star Wars. We love this universe, and you have ruined it. That's why I'm having so much fun listening to Revan, which is a fantastic novel of the Old Republic. It's the reason why I loved Path of Destruction from the Darth Bane series. I'm so freaking hyped on EU right now because those are the stories that should have been told. But Kathleen No Idea Kennedy, said, oh, we have no source material. We started this new trilogy not having any source material whatsoever. Well, guess what? I've got a whole chock full of novels that have been written ever since, starting from the 1970s, mostly in the early 2000s, that you could have used as source material for, and you decided to instead, what? Make most of it non-canon. Well, guess what? The fans have spoken very loudly. Your canon sucks. Looks like headcanon is the way to go. Let me know your thoughts about this and all things talked about in the comment section below. Like this video, smash the like button, give me a subscribe. It helps me out a lot. You're all amazing, beautiful people. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless.